Hello again and welcome to Cotton Innovations Limited. And at Cotton Innovations Limited we love to share with you tools and techniques that we use to help our clients move their processes forward. And we're hoping that you find these series really useful. Today we're going to be looking at Fmea and how useful this is. Failure mode and effect analysis. It's often taught as a standalone tool, but in Cotton Innovations Limited it's very much a tool that sits together with a lot of the other tools that we've talked about. It sits together with Cotter, it sits together with the process changes, it sits together with all the things that we've talked about so far. And we're going to look at a series of tools that Fmea needs to work with to help us in our process improvement. So for example, we're going to talk about how data fits, we're going to talk about stability, we're going to talk about mapping, optimization and deployment. All of those are important when we're considering Fmea. But when we're looking at Fmea, well, what do we mean by Fmea? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to define the step or the process that we're trying to look at. So that's step number one. Having done that, understood exactly what we're going to deploy, we then need to understand what could go wrong. Now, what do we mean by that? The failure mode. How could something fail? So this is our second step. Now when we're talking about something failing, take for example this pen. There are various ways it could fail. It could leak on the user. It could blotch as they write. It could run out of ink or appear to have run out of ink when there's still ink inside. The fibre tip itself could actually start to fail. So we need to understand what we mean by failure. How would the consumer, the customer, the user see that failure? Now this is really important because quite often as engineers and as processing people, we will think about the way we want something to work. We will not consider the way the consumer uses something. And that can be quite often a different set of scenarios. So for example, like a screwdriver, it was designed to rotate screws. I'll let you decide what you use a screwdriver for, but it's far more than using screws. So having designed that, we then need to think about two things. We need to think about, in the third step, we need to think about the severity of failure. Now this is really interesting because when people talk about the severity of failure, quite often in an Fmea, they'll talk about a mechanical process. So severity is about death, it's about entrapment, it's about physical injury. But unfortunately, a lot of the processes we look at in Cotton Innovations are nothing to do with production, so that's not going to happen. So the severest ratings are 10s, damaging your brand, removing yourself from a market space, becoming non-competitive in your space. That's a 10 because you may not be able to get into that space. So severity here is not always about death and injury. Quite often it's about your brand values, your market share, your market space. The other thing we need to think about is in step 4, the occurrence of failure. Now what do we mean here by the occurrence of failure? What we're saying is how many times do we see a failure? And we're going to talk about in terms of fit of our data, capability analysis, defects per million. We're going to look at how often do we see failure. We need to understand that. If I'm trying to fix a one-off on an Fmea, all the best for that. If I'm looking at trying to understand a regular occurring failure, this is going to be a really powerful tool for helping me see what's going on. The next step is I then need to look at my ability to detect my failure. Now what do I mean by that? Detecting a failure is really, really important because I'm going to score a 10 for severity. How dangerous could it be for my brand, for an individual? How much risk does it bring into my business? Occurrence is going to be scored a 1 to 10. 10 would be it happens all the time. And then detection, I'm then going to look at how good are we at seeing it. So this also could score 10. 10, I've got no idea until after the event that we have a failure mode. Now, I'm going to take those three things, and what I'm going to do in step 6 is I'm going to do a risk assessment. And we call this an RPN, risk priority number. And this effectively is on a scale of 1 to 1,000. So if I scored 1, 1, 1, multiply the 3 together, I get 1, 10, 10, 10, multiply them together, I get 1,000. So I can now have a ranking of what is the most important risks to my business. Now this is really important, so I need to understand that the severity, it's really important, the detection, we can actually see it, the occurrence, we know how often it occurs. So there's a whole bunch of tools down here we're going to talk about which are related to FMEA. There's videos to watch on how my data fits to specs, my stability will tell me how often it occurs, the mapping of my process, where does this problem occur, what type of problem we look at, optimization of my process, have we optimized it to make sure that the risk of failure can't happen, that's also called regression modeling, and deploy, how have we put our changes together to create change. Once I've got all that in place, I then can do step 7. And step 7 is a new ways of working. So I'm going to redefine the new ways of working from what are the high risk areas in step 6. So I'm going to change my processes, I'm going to look to refit my data to specs, I'm going to remove my upper or my lower occurrences of issues, I'm going to look at better ways of working with my mapping, I'm going to re-optimize my process, I'm going to put actions in place to deploy things to help me out. And then finally, I'm going to in step 8, I'm going to reassess the risk. Now, it's really important when we're reassessing the risk that we take the severity of number 3 and we carry that severity forward. So FMEA is not about changing severity. Severity at the beginning of the risk is the same as the severity at the end of the risk. What we're doing is reducing the occurrence and we're improving our detection process so that it doesn't matter what the severity is, I can control and eliminate the events. Fmea Workshops, we often run Fmea Workshops. If we're doing major changes with people, we'll often put an Fmea together. Please reach out to us at Cotton Innovations Limited. All the information is at the bottom of the screen for you to connect with us. We would love to help you with your workshops, help you move forward, understanding risk. If you're making any changes to a process, strongly recommend that you do an Fmea, understand my risks, am I in a good place, am I not? Thank you so much for watching this video. We look forward to hearing from you and we look forward to helping you with your process improvement. Thank you so much. Goodbye now.